Imagine recurring stimulus checks and championed by, get this, the Trump administration.
Sounds a bit crazy, right?
Right? Sounds wild, but maybe not so crazy after all.
It's definitely an interesting concept.
Well, that's the potential reality that we're seeing presented by the Doge Dividend. You familiar with this?
Oh yeah, a plan with a really interesting twist, right? Uncovering government waste, fraud, and abuse.
Exactly. Before we get too far, if you're interested in this kind of thing, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of these conversations. So let's break it down. The Doge and Doge Dividend, we're talking about the Department of Government Efficiency, right?
That's right.
What's their mission?
So the Doge, as it's come to be known, has a pretty ambitious goal. They're looking to identify and cut, get this, $2 trillion.
$2 trillion.
From the federal budget.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of money. So where does the dividend part come in? How do those savings translate into, money for the average American?
So that's where it gets really interesting. The idea is that the American public, you would actually play a role in identifying this waste and fraud.
Okay.
So imagine a system where your insights, what you see and know, could actually impact the size of your own dividend check.
Wow.
It's like a nationwide, crowdsourced, efficiency audit with a direct financial incentive.
Oh, interesting. I'd love to hear more about how that would work in practice. But first, can you give me an example of the kind of government waste that they're targeting?
Absolutely. So one area that immediately comes to mind is federal credit card abuse.
Okay.
Reports indicate a potential misuse of funds to the tune of around $40 billion.
$40 billion. Okay. I mean, while that's a massive number, isn't that just a drop in the bucket when we're talking about a federal budget in the trillions? I mean, help me understand the scale of this.
That's a fair point. It's important to keep things in perspective, but even a drop in the bucket, as you say, is significant when we're talking about billions of taxpayer dollars.
Right.
And then the potential for abuse, it's amplified when you consider the sheer number of cards in circulation. 4.3 million.
3.3 million.
Yeah. That's potentially more federal credit cards than actual federal employees.
Wow.
Which raises some serious questions about oversight and accountability.
Definitely makes you wonder who has access to those cards and how they're being used.
Right.
Have any specific examples of misuse actually come to light?
So that's where more investigation is needed.
Okay.
While there's, evidence of potential abuse, concrete examples are still being uncovered. What we do know is that the sheer number of cards, coupled with this lack of really robust oversight, it creates an environment that's ripe for misuse. And it begs the question, have you ever witnessed anything in your own community that seemed like government waste or inefficiency? If so, and if reporting it could mean, a bigger dividend check, would you be motivated to speak up? Let us know in the comments. And hey, if you're finding this conversation as interesting as we are, please hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people that might be, interested in this topic.
Yeah, that's a great question. It really gets you thinking about the potential impact of, everyday citizens actually getting involved. But let's get back to the Doge dividend itself. How much are we talking about per household? And who would actually qualify for something like this?
Right now, the proposal outlines a $5,000 check.
$5,000.
Per household. And it's really being framed as a type of economic stimulus.
Okay.
Similar to the stimulus checks that went out during the pandemic.
Oh, okay. So wouldn't that mean that everyone would be eligible?
Well, not necessarily. There's been some talk of implementing work requirements, which of course aligns with the Trump administration's focus on workforce participation. So this would likely mean that only households where, someone has been employed in recent years would qualify.
I mean, while incentivizing work is important, couldn't these requirements disproportionately impact, those who are unable to work due to a disability or caregiving responsibilities? I mean, it's really crucial to consider those consequences for vulnerable populations.
You're absolutely right. Any policy, anything like this would need to carefully consider those nuances, make sure that it's fair in its implementation. And then, of course, there's the question of how this dividend would be taxed, if at all.
Right.
Based on what we've seen, it appears it would be tax-free. So recipients would keep the full amount.
Okay. Let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Sure.
The national debt. Wouldn't a massive payout like this negatively impact our already astronomical $36 trillion debt?
That's a valid concern, and it's definitely a point of contention among economists and policymakers. Some would argue that paying down the national debt should be prioritized over any type of stimulus. However, there's also a strong argument to be made that maintaining a healthy level of inflation, it actually requires money circulating within the economy.
So it's a balancing act.
Yes.
Between reducing the debt and stimulating economic activity. How would this dividend potentially affect inflation? And what role would the Federal Reserve play in all of this?
Right. So that's where it gets a bit complex. The Federal Reserve has tools at its disposal to manage inflation, primarily by adjusting interest rates. So in simple terms, raising interest rates can slow down inflation, while lowering them can stimulate spending. The impact of the Doge dividend on inflation, it would depend on a lot of factors, including, the overall state of the economy, how quickly the money is spent. The Federal Reserve would likely, monitor these things closely and adjust rates accordingly to try to maintain stability. It really is a complex web of different factors at play. And, it's important to remember that this whole dividend program, it's still in its early stages. I mean, it's being considered as a reasonable possibility, but, there's no guarantee that it'll actually happen.
So a lot of uncertainty still surrounding its implementation. What are some of the factors that might influence whether it actually moves forward?
Well, I think political will is a big one.
Okay.
The success of a program like this really hinges on the government's commitment to identifying and actually eliminating this waste. And it's worth pointing out that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent himself, he's actually acknowledged the existence of what he called real fraud within the government. So that suggests that there's at least some recognition of the problem and maybe a willingness to address it.
That's encouraging. But even if the Doge dividend does become a reality, wouldn't there be some downsides, some unintended consequences? I mean, no policy is perfect, right?
You're absolutely right. One concern is that, this laser focus on cutting spending could inadvertently lead to cuts in essential services or programs.
Right.
Things that people really rely on. It's a delicate balance.
So it's not just about cutting for the sake of cutting. It's about prioritizing.
Exactly.
And making sure that those cuts don't disproportionately impact the people that really need government assistance. What are some other potential downsides that we should be thinking about?
Well, we talked about the potential for the Doge dividend to really impact inflation.
Yeah.
There's also a risk that a sudden influx of cash into the economy could actually, exacerbate those existing inflationary pressures.
Okay.
Which could lead to even higher prices for goods and services.
Yeah, if everyone suddenly has more money to spend, it's going to, drive up demand, potentially outpace supply.
Right.
Which leads to inflation. Are there other economic considerations that we haven't even touched on yet?
Well, we've talked about the potential benefits of putting money directly in the hands of consumers, especially during times of economic uncertainty. But we also need to consider the cost of actually implementing a program like this.
Oh, right.
Right. So think about the administrative burden of verifying eligibility, processing millions of payments, establishing reporting mechanisms. These things aren't free, right?
Right.
And those costs could actually offset some of those intended savings.
That's a really good point. Efficiency and cost savings are at the heart of this proposal. So it would be kind of ironic if the program itself was inefficient and costly to run.
Exactly. And then it also raises the question of fairness. Is a flat dividend check the same amount for every household? Is that really the most equitable way to distribute these savings? Some might argue that, a tiered system where people with lower incomes, they receive a larger share, that would be more just and more impactful.
That's an interesting perspective. It would definitely align with, that concept of using government resources to really support those who need it most. But, I mean, it would also add complexity to the program.
Oh, absolutely. Every potential solution comes with its own set of complexities and trade-offs.
It seems like the Doge dividend, while potentially beneficial, is really far from a simple solution. I mean, there's so many factors to weigh. There's potential pitfalls to avoid. And there's just a lot of uncertainty around whether it's even feasible.
That's a fair assessment. It's really crucial to approach any proposal like this with a healthy dose of skepticism and critical thinking. We need to look beyond just the initial appeal of free money,
right,
and really get into the potential consequences, both the intended ones and the unintended ones.
And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're unpacking these complex issues. We're considering, multiple perspectives. We're really encouraging you to think critically about the implications. If you're finding value in this discussion, don't forget to hit that like button.
Yeah.
It really helps us reach a wider audience and keep these important conversations going.
Absolutely.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about the role that technology could play in this. I mean, we live in a digital age, so there's got to be tools out there that could help streamline the identification and elimination of government waste.
Absolutely. I mean, using technology seems almost inevitable in a program like this, right? So how could things like artificial intelligence, data analytics, how could they be leveraged to make the Doge Dividend, more efficient and effective?
Yeah. What could that look like?
Well, AI and data analytics have already, they've been incredibly useful in other sectors like finance and healthcare for detecting fraud, identifying patterns of waste, abuse. So in the context of government spending, these technologies could be used to analyze these massive data sets, flag anomalies, identify potential areas for improvement, much more efficiently than traditional, manual audits.
So it's almost like having a digital watchdog.
Yeah.
Constantly monitoring government spending, alerting us to potential problems. That sounds promising. But what about the potential downsides of relying on technology? Are there ethical considerations or risks that we should be thinking about?
You're right to raise those concerns. Anytime we talk about using technology to monitor and analyze data, we need to be very careful about ensuring privacy, transparency, accountability.
Right.
We need clear guidelines, safeguards to prevent misuse, and just to make sure that these, very powerful tools, that they're being used ethically and responsibly.
It's that balance between leveraging the power of technology,
right,
but also protecting individual rights and privacy.
Exactly. And it raises a really crucial question for all of us. How comfortable are we with the government using AI and data analytics to really scrutinize spending? What level of oversight and transparency is necessary to maintain public trust? These are questions that, we really need to grapple with as a society.
It really is. It's an important conversation, especially as technology just becomes more and more integrated into our lives.
Right.
And government operations. But let's not forget about, the human element in all this. We were talking earlier about citizens playing a role and actually identifying government waste.
Yeah.
What would that look like? How could that work?
Well, imagine a system where citizens can easily report suspicious activity.
Okay.
Or just suggest areas for, potential improvement. Could be as simple as a dedicated website.
Right.
And an app where people can submit tips and evidence.
Oh, okay. So like a digital suggestion box.
Yeah.
But for government efficiency, I like it.
Exactly. And to really incentivize participation, maybe a portion of the savings that are generated from those citizen tips, they could be returned to the individuals who reported them.
Oh, wow.
It could really create a sense of ownership,
yeah.
Empower citizens to hold the government accountable.
That's a really cool idea. It would certainly encourage people to pay closer attention to how their tax dollars are being spent. But wouldn't something like that be prone to abuse? People could submit false reports just to try and get a reward.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. To prevent that kind of abuse, you'd need a pretty robust system of verification.
Right.
Maybe involving experts, who would vet those reports.
Sure.
before any action was taken. And you'd need clear guidelines, clear criteria for what actually constitutes, legitimate waste or fraud. I mean, it wouldn't be a perfect system,
right.
But with careful planning and execution, it could be a really valuable tool for promoting transparency and accountability.
Yeah, I think it's an idea worth exploring. We've covered a lot in this conversation, from the potential benefits of the Doge dividend to the complexities of implementing it and the role that technology could play. What are your final thoughts on this proposal? Is it a good idea?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? I think there are really compelling arguments to be made on both sides. I mean, on the one hand, putting money directly in the hands of consumers, it could provide a real economic boost, especially, during times of uncertainty.
Right.
And if the Doge dividend can truly uncover and eliminate a significant amount of government waste, then that's a win-win for everyone. But we have to be realistic about the the potential challenges, right?
Right.
The unintended consequences. I mean, we talked about, the risks of inflation, the administrative costs of actually running a program like this, and the need to ensure fairness and equity in its design.
Yeah. It seems like there's a lot of ifs and buts surrounding the Doge dividend. It's definitely not as simple as just sending everyone a check.
No, you're absolutely right. It's ultimately up to policymakers to weigh all those factors, right?
Right.
And make informed decisions. But regardless of whether the Doge dividend becomes, a reality, the conversation that it's sparked, I think that's incredibly valuable.
It's definitely a conversation worth having, and we need to keep having it. If you've enjoyed this conversation about the Doge dividend and you want to hear more discussions like this, make sure you subscribe.
And if you found this conversation valuable, we'd really appreciate it if you gave this episode a like. Your support helps us reach more people and keep having these important conversations. Thanks for listening.